are probably the most popular pet in a lot of countries around the world. One of my favorite sites to go to, is, and I'm sure you have your own cat sites that you go to, is cats attacking babies. If you haven't been to that site, Google cats attacking babies. It's got millions of hits because it's hilarious. It is funny. But the thing that we need to remember is that these animals that are so cute, that are just so fascinating, have a different side to them. That also, those behaviors are what we find so attractive when they're outdoors. They are predators. That's what they do. That's exactly what's inbred in them. That is part of their behaviors. And so when put outside, they will kill anything that moves, or they'll attack anything that moves. Not all cats, but most cats will do what comes naturally to them, which is kill. Here, killing a hooded warbler. Not only that, when cats are outside unattended, they reproduce really rapidly. They'll have 2 to 3 litters a year, sometimes 4 to 6, even to 8 kittens per litter. So their reproductive potential is very, very high if they're not spayed or neutered. And cats carry an enormous number of diseases, pathogens, like a lot of animals do. And when these pathogens and these animals, when cats come close to us, there's a potential for transmission of these diseases. This is known as a zoonotic disease. Many of you are aware of zoonotic diseases, I'm sure. We've learned over the past 15 or 20 years about a lot of zoonotic diseases. This is an emerging field in itself, these emerging infectious diseases that we can now get from animals. There's lots that cats can move to people and also to other wildlife. So not only do they kill things, they spread a variety of diseases to humans. But not only that, when cats are outside, it's not good for cats. So from a humane perspective, it's not a humane thing to leave a cat outside. Because as you'll see, there's lots of bad things that happen to cats outside. So all in all, it's just not a good thing. And I think what I'll talk about today is all the evidence. If you read the book, you've seen the evidence. But the question that we have to cope with as citizens on this earth is, should we let cats persist outside despite these consequences for wildlife, humans, and themselves? But unfortunately, the question doesn't just stop there. That's the initial question. But the bigger question after that, the one where all the controversy is sort of coming up, is what does that mean? How are we going to deal with these cats? And that's where it gets really, really tricky. And that's where these decisions get very controversial. So let me provide you with a little bit of background on cats. So there are about 40 species of native cats around the world. Most of you are familiar with the 7 big cats: lions, tigers, cheetahs, leopards, pumas, snow leopards. Which one did I forget? Which one? Jaguars, right. Okay, pretty good, thank you. And then there are 33 species of really cool, small, native cats. Things like flat-faced cat, margay, jaguarundi, sand cat. There's all these really cool 33 species of cats that occur globally in a variety of different habitats. This is actually the European wildcat. This is actually a wildcat, and there are about 20 different subspecies of this European wildcat. This is Felis sylvestris. Today's domestic cat, Felis domesticus, is thought to have come from about 5 different subspecies of the European wildcat. And we think that that happened around 10,000 years ago or so, because there were actually bones of a domesticated cat that were found in tombs of people, and we were able to date that using a variety of different tools. We don't know exactly how it happened. We almost never do, obviously, because these domestications occur so long ago. But we think what happened was around 10,000 years ago, people started to store rice, started to store grains, started to live in houses, store water. And what happens when you do that? What? You get vermin. You can call them what you want. Native species of animals that actually small mice, small birds, that start getting attracted to this new ecosystem that's been built up by humans. And when you have these small prey that start to build up, you start to attract other things, whether in this area there might be raccoons or foxes. Back then it might have been European wildcats. And we know that there's actually a gene for tameness. So some cats probably came in, ate well, did well, bred well. They might have been captured. Tame ones may have been bred in captivity. Or over time they may have just maintained themselves living around humans. However it happened, cats became domesticated around 10,000 years ago or so. Since then, they've become embedded in our culture. in our history in so many ways. They're in Greek and Roman architecture. We see them in sculptures, in ancient carvings. This is one of Pablo Picasso's famous paintings called Cat Killing Bird. Pablo Picasso left us with about 50,000 paintings or so, and this guy loved cats. He included cats in a lot of his paintings. Mark Twain used to walk around with a cat draped around his neck. Cats are in our culture in so many ways, and they're in our contemporary culture as well. Sylvester the cat, of course. Morris for president. This is sounding pretty good right now. Garfield the cat. Little Kitty, Grumpy the cat. There's actually a coffee drink called a Grumpuccino, named after Grumpy the cat, and of course Felix the cat. But as you can see, cats are embedded in everything we do. It's impossible to kind of go anywhere in a day without really either seeing a live cat, seeing it on TV, or seeing it somewhere, seeing it on a whatever. Cats are all over the place, so we've got this mindset that cats are really part of us. But the thing that we have to remember in any time we're thinking about cats and the environment is that cats are a domesticated species. We can have all of our fun with cats, right? With all these memes, with all these cartoons, with all this history. But cats are a domesticated species. They occur in no native ecosystem anywhere in the world. They are domesticated like a sheep, like a cow, like a dog, a chicken, a pig, and a rabbit. These are all domesticated species that have no native ecosystem anywhere in the world. If they are roaming free anywhere, they're probably causing some sort of destruction somewhere, which all of these have done in many ways, and still do in some ways globally. We have a lot of cats globally. We don't really know how many, but in the United States, we can count them, some of them. And when I think of outdoor cats, let me explain the different categories of cats. You've got the cats that are owned, that are either indoor cats. Those are super. No problems with those at all. That's awesome. But then you've got owned cats that are let outside. So we can count those pretty well. But then you've got outdoor cats that are not owned. Those cats are very difficult to count, but I'll talk about some estimates that we have. And then you have what's called feral cats. So the word feral is misused a lot. Feral really means that it's an animal that is domesticated that has no association with humans whatsoever. So you'd expect it to find it in some of the most pristine areas possible. We have them here too. But that's how feral is typically used. Let's not get too worried about that pure definition today. In the United States, and this is a pretty good estimate, we have roughly 90 million owned cats. That number's probably going up, but we don't really know that. And around 66% of these are thought to go outside. That leaves us with about 60 million owned outdoor cats. Some people think that number has actually gone down over the last 10 years, thanks to a lot of education about how bad it is to let an outdoor cat outside. But some people also think it has not gone down. It may have gone up, or it's at least stable, because some of these early estimates totally did not count lower income groups. And in a lot of lower income groups, there's a high tendency to let animals outside. We don't really have a good estimate of the number of unowned cats out there. The numbers that a couple different groups have put out there are somewhere between 60 to 100 million unowned cats in the United States. We typically use, in a lot of the modeling that we do for our research, we start with 30 million because we want to be as conservative as possible, because this topic is highly controversial, so we try to be as conservative as we possibly can, despite what you may have heard, and we go up to 80 million as our range. But we really don't have a good estimate of the number of cats that are out there, unowned cats that are typically part of a colony. And then we really have no idea how many feral cats there are. That would be a third group. But I can tell you that I've been recently consulting with the National Park Service, and they have problems on 40 national parks, a minimum of 40 national parks with outdoor, what we would call feral cats. And that's just the tip of the iceberg. So we have somewhere between 90 and 160 million outdoor cats, and I would argue that that number is growing, and probably growing exponentially, because there's no way we're stopping the reproduction in the vast majority of those cats. At the same time, in the United States, we have somewhere between 750 and 800 native species of birds that regularly occur in the U.S. And I'm not even talking about mammals or other animals. I'm going to focus on birds. Things like swallows and woodpeckers and cuckoos and orioles and catbirds and hawks and tanagers and grosbeaks and flycatchers. These species are native species that we have a responsibility to protect and to make sure that their long-term survival is preserved, not just for us, but for our children and their children. Folks, right now we're seeing a decline in about 47% of the native species in North America. 47% of the birds in North America are declining significantly. That's almost half. That is unacceptable. It should be nowhere near that. We're in what's known as the 6th mass extinction. This is not a belief. Just like climate change is not a belief. This is based in solid science. You can't argue with it. Scientists that study this, like myself, the evidence is just totally clear. It's not a discussion. We're in the 6th mass extinction. We're watching these things happen right before our very eyes. Things like the cerulean warbler is declining by 75%. That means 3 out of 4 birds in the last 40 years are now gone. This is a bird that winters the most of the year in the Andes, eastern Andes, Colombia, Ecuador, and then migrates up through Central America, across the Gulf of Mexico, and breeds somewhere in the Appalachians and southern Canada. We don't actually know why this bird is dying, but I'm sure cats are contributing to it. But habitat loss is probably one of the big drivers of driving this species probably to extinction. Another species, the piping plover, this is actually an endangered species. And this is a species that's currently under threat from cats. Cat colonies that are right next to, on beaches, in Long Island. This is actually a lawsuit that's just about to happen. There are cat colonies that are actually threatening breeding piping plovers. This has happened multiple times. There are multiple cases of piping plovers dying from outdoor cats. So today I'm going to talk about the evidence for the consequences. I'll go into a lot of this in some detail. I'm not going to go into all the detail because, frankly, I want you to buy the book. I want you to read the book. I want you to see all the evidence in the book. I want you to give the book to your neighbor, those neighbors that have cats, because we all have them. Those are the starting points for a lot of these cat wars. Then I'll talk about the solutions. What are our choices? We have a finite set of choices that we can make. We have to make. We have to pressure people to make. And we'll talk about those. And then I'll talk about what I refer to as the cat wars. And when I talk about cat wars, I'm not referring to our war on cats. I'm referring to the wars between people and the deniers of the science and the evidence that exists about the impacts of cats on the environment and on people. And that those wars can be between individuals and their neighbors, and the fact that these cats come onto your property, and they might defecate in your property, they might kill animals in your property, or it's the battles between groups, the nonprofit cat or humane groups and the wildlife advocates that want to protect native species. Those are the cat wars. So let's start off, and I want you to put yourself back to around 1890, a time when there weren't airplanes, there weren't no fax machines. You probably don't know what fax machines are anyway, I guess, these days. No cell phones, no texting. The way people got around the world, the way commerce happened, was on boats. Things were shipped around the world on boats, and many of those boats happened to be wooden. And if those boats entered into a harbor at night and didn't really know the passage, if they hit a rock, that rock would probably just tear right through the belly of that ship, and the ship would sink. Most of those sailors couldn't swim. And this is exactly what had happened in the 1880s in New Zealand in a place right around Stevens Island. There had been 3 major shipwrecks. Hundreds of sailors had died. And so the New Zealand Maritime Agency decided that they were going to put up a lighthouse. This was happening all over the world at the time. Lighthouses were being erected. And people would go out into these islands that prior to that had no human exposure or very little human exposure. So there were all these things on these islands that had evolved on these islands, that were really specialized on these islands, that hadn't been exposed to humans or the things that humans brought to these islands. So in 1890, a guy by the name of, or 1894, a guy by the name of David Lyall, who was an amateur naturalist, he knew most of the birds in New Zealand, he got a job as one of the lighthouse keepers, one of the first of 3. And he went out to Stevens Island with his wife and at least 1 child. And as one story goes, he had a cat by the name of Tibbles. It may not have been Tibbles, but that's the story. And that cat may have been pregnant, it may not have been pregnant. There may have been another cat that was brought out. But in any case, there quickly were multiple cats out there. And that Tibbles cat or another cat started to bring in specimens of this bird into David Lyall. And David, because he was an amateur naturalist, also knew how to prepare specimens. And he prepared 15 specimens of what is now an extinct species called the Stevens Island wren. The cat brought in 15 and no more. No other specimens were ever found. No other birds were ever observed. This species was extinct within 6 months, and it was officially declared extinct within a year. In fact, the headline on the local news, the Christchurch newspaper, was "A record extinction in just under a year." Now, I wish I could say that cats contributed to just that one extinction, that was the first and the last extinction that cats have contributed to, but I can't. Cats have actually contributed to a minimum of 63 species extinctions. Now, when I wrote the book, this paper hadn't been published yet, and what I referred to was 33 species extinctions. But after the book was published, this paper came out in the Proceedings of the National Academy of Sciences, which is one of the best journals on the earth, and Doherty actually did a much larger analysis, and he actually attributed cats to 63 species extinctions. Now, cats didn't cause each extinction, but they definitely contributed to these extinctions. It's rare that a single factor actually drives a species extinct. It happens. But typically, it's multiple and interacting effects that drive things extinct. It's 2 reptiles, 40 birds, and 21 mammals that cats have contributed to. Now, that would be enough for me. DDT, something that we dealt with, you probably have read Silent Spring or are familiar with Silent Spring, the ravages of DDT and how that almost caused the extinctions of things like bald eagle, our national bird, peregrine falcon, brown pelican, osprey, the list goes on and on. We actually stepped in and removed DDT before it was a real problem. And DDT has never caused the extinction of a species because we knew how to deal with it. We got rid of the problem. Cats have contributed to the extinction of 63 species. And still, we're not dealing with this problem like we need to be dealing with this problem. When I go and I talk to people about this in regulatory agencies and other places, and even conservation organizations, their response is, well, we really don't know if cats are causing a population-level impact. I say, phooey. It's not true. We have lots of evidence that cats are causing a population-level impact. In fact, every one of those extinctions is a population-level impact. But what do I mean by that? Well, what it means is that basically, if cats are killing a certain number of individuals within a population, they would argue, or some would argue, that cats can reproduce to compensate for that mortality, and the population size would go back up to where it was once before. So that's called compensatory mortality. What I'm arguing, and what we've shown in several different papers and in this book, and lots of papers have shown, is that mortality actually doesn't ever, cats cannot respond, and mammals can't respond. It's additive mortality. So the population stays suppressed or continues to go down, and that their reproduction can't actually compensate to bring the population levels back up. So I go through multiple examples in the book. I'm going to go through one example for you tonight. This is a study done by Kevin Crooks and Michael Soule. Michael Soule is thought to be one of the founders of conservation biology. This paper was published in the journal Nature, which is also one of the top 2 journals in the world. And I'm pointing this out to you because a lot of these papers on cats and their impacts have been published in some of the top journals in the world, but we're still not doing anything about this issue. So what Kevin and Michael did was they studied cats, coyotes, and birds across fragments, not fragments of forest, but fragments of grassland in Southern California that varied in size. And basically what they did was they looked at big fragments of grassland and small grassland fragments. In the small grassland fragments, all these grassland fragments had houses around them. And a lot of these people in these houses own cats, and they let them go outside. The difference was that the big grassland fragments could support coyote populations, and the small grassland fragments did not support coyote populations. And in the big grassland fragments, coyotes ate all the cats. Turns out coyotes love to eat cats. It's one of the things that they will actually go for preferentially. And when coyotes ate the cats, they got rid of a mid-level predator. It's called a mesopredator. And those mesopredators typically would prey upon the birds. And when the coyotes got rid of the cats, the coyotes were great, and the birds were also great. Their diversity was high, their abundances were high, and the bird populations flourished. In the small grassland fragments, where there were no coyotes, turns out the mesopredators were the top carnivore in that system, and bird populations were impacted. Several species went locally extinct. Bird abundances were way down. There were clear population-level impacts in that system. Clear, really clear system where it showed population-level impacts. And there's multiple studies. There's studies in Europe. There's studies in Australia. There's experimental studies. There's enormous numbers a lot of research out there that looks at this specific problem. Still, we don't have enough, and still the cat colonies are growing and people maintain cats outside. Organizations are not taking a stand on this issue. Well, in around 2010 or so, the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service contacted me and they said, Pete, we'd like to know basically how many birds are killed per year from a variety of direct anthropogenic sources. So habitat loss is sort of an indirect source of mortality because you get rid of the habitat, animals can't breed, it's not killing animals directly. Power lines or buildings, when an animal just hits it, that's a direct source of mortality that's caused by humans. So we call that direct anthropogenic mortality. Cats killing birds, that's direct anthropogenic mortality. So they wanted to come up with basically a survey using all the existing data that are out there, which gave us the best estimates possible for the number of birds killed from a variety of sources: wind turbines, electric lines, automobiles, cats, etc. So I said, sure, we'll do this. It's never really been done well. Prior to this, all the other studies had pointed to collisions with buildings at about 500 million birds per year as being the #1 cause of bird mortality. This was something that had been propagated in all the literature, was in all the textbooks, but when you looked to figure out what the underlying data were to support that, it wasn't very good. So we did this. We built a model, basically. We pulled together the research that was available on the number of birds that were killed by owned cats, the number of birds that were killed by unowned cats. We only limited it to studies that had good sample sizes of cats or that were able to really estimate the cat mortality well. And it turns out building a model is not a hard thing to do. It's actually quite an easy thing to do. Shouldn't be intimidated by that. But when we did this, we basically estimated that cats are killing somewhere between 1.3 and 4 billion birds per year. And most of that mortality is caused by unowned cats. We don't have a bag of dead birds to demonstrate this. This is a prediction based upon the number of cats that are out there and what we know cats kill on average per week. Does that make sense? So, but it's not just birds. So the median estimate was 2.4 billion birds, and we know cats kill a lot more mammals, so about 12.3 billion mammals per year, and then hundreds of millions of reptiles and amphibians as well. So how does this compare to other sources of direct mortality? Well, I know this graph is hard to read, but I really want you just to see the relative proportions here. This is the green are the U.S. birds that are killed, and the blue are in Canada. The same time we were doing these estimates in the U.S., turns out Canada was doing the same exact study. We didn't know this. Fish and Wildlife didn't tell us. But what we found was that relative to buildings and windows, cats became the #1 killer in both the U.S. and in Canada. It flipped. It's much lower in Canada at about 200 million because there are just a lot fewer cats, outdoor cats in Canada. It's very cold. Cats can't survive there. But relative to things like wind turbines, you can see 2.4 billion all the way down to a couple 100,000. The relative proportion of individual animals that are killed by cats far exceeds anything. It's 5 times as high as buildings and windows. So if I'm going to focus my research on a conservation issue, this is what drives it. This is my priority setting exercise to determine that. So we've got 63 species extinctions at a minimum. There are many extinctions out there that we've not yet identified. We've got population level consequences and just a magnitude of mortality that's sort of hard to comprehend, really. So cats are clearly having significant consequences on the environment in a variety of ways in terms of their impact on wildlife. But as I mentioned, they also carry several different really harmful diseases. And I'm going to talk about one of those tonight, Toxoplasma. Toxoplasma gondii. It's a protozoan parasite. But we could easily talk about rabies. We could easily talk about a variety of things, especially in Pennsylvania. Rabies is a significant issue in Pennsylvania. If you have questions about that, be sure to ask a little bit later. This is a human eye, and this is a Toxoplasma gondii scar. And so next time you're at the eye doctor, ask your eye doctor how often they see ocular toxoplasma scars. You're going to be surprised. Let me tell you a little bit about this incredible little parasite, Toxoplasma gondii. Again, it's a protozoan parasite. It breeds only in cats, not just domestic cats, but other cat species, bobcats, mountain lions, have their own variant of Toxoplasma gondii. But this little protozoan parasite breeds within cats for about a week or two. And after it's breeding, cats will shed millions of these little, basically egg stages of this parasite into the environment. These are called oocysts. And these oocysts are some of the most indestructible things in nature. They survive frozen soil, they survive dry soil, they survive freshwater environments, they survive marine environments. I'm pretty sure they'd survive the moon or Mars. But they're almost indestructible, and they'll survive up to a year. And again, cats will shed millions of these into the environment. Now, the natural history of this thing is just fascinating. What's supposed to happen is that this oocyst is supposed to get picked up by a typical prey item of the cat, like a mouse or a bird. And what it does is that fecal oocyst turns into a brachiocyst and then to a tachyocyst as it changes in the new host. And it moves up through muscle and nerves into the brain of that host, and it changes the brain chemistry, and it changes the behavior of that new host. So that mouse goes from being afraid of cats to being attracted to cats. It goes from being afraid or fearful or hating cat urine to loving cat urine. This has been demonstrated in experiments. It's been demonstrated by some of the world's most renowned scientists. This is a well-documented phenomenon. And the reason it happens is because by changing the behavior of its host, by changing the behavior of that rodent becomes prey for another cat, and that parasite increases the probability of breeding in a new host. So by doing that, by changing this, it's called the fatal attraction hypothesis, it actually continues its life cycle by moving into new cats every time. And so it's a brilliant strategy if you're a protozoan parasite. It's not such a good thing if you're an unintended host, like many humans are. The way we've heard about Toxoplasma gondii most commonly is through its effects on pregnant women. And it's funny because actually most pregnant women are told, hopefully they're told by their doctors, not to change kitty litter and actually not to garden anymore. Hopefully you're told that if you're pregnant. Because if you ingest a fecal oocyst from Toxoplasma, the chances of you actually aborting a fetus or having that fetus have some sort of problem are pretty high. But many people don't know why they're told not to change kitty litter boxes, but this is why. It's because of the risk of being exposed to Toxoplasma gondii oocysts. This is a problem we've done a really good job with in most developing countries, although it still happens with regularity in the US, where women are exposed to Toxoplasma gondii and they either abort, and I'm sure it's a way underreported issue because of miscarriages and not knowing what causes that miscarriage. But it's still a big problem in a lot of developing countries. What we've come to realize now is that there are a variety of other issues associated with Toxoplasma gondii infection. And in fact, about 22% of you, 15 to 22% of you, are right now infected with Toxoplasma gondii. 2 billion people in the world are thought to be infected with Toxoplasma gondii. It's a lifelong infection that you'll never get rid of. As soon as you get infected, many people don't know you're infected. You may develop some sort of, if you have a compromised immune system, you may actually show some fever or some other symptoms, and your doctor can give you a type of antibiotic that will relieve you of those symptoms, but you actually never get rid of the oocysts that lodge in your brain. And where they lodge in your brain will determine a variety of the things that ultimately may or may not happen to you later in life. I should also tell you that there are a couple different ways that humans get Toxoplasma gondii, one of which is through fecal-oral transmission. How many of us have been, I'm a gardener, and many times I have come across that little Snicker bar in the garden because cats like to defecate in loose soil, and that's where you'll often find cat feces, or in sandboxes where children play. These are the places where you can be exposed to cat feces. The other way we get it, because cats are often near farms, is through the meat that we eat, because lamb, pigs, cows are exposed to these cats, and those oocysts are lodged in that meat. And if we eat our meat anyway but well done, then those oocysts get ingested in us, and then we actually incorporate those into our own bodies. And in fact, Toxoplasma gondii, according to the CDC, is the most common foodborne illness in the world. So we now know that Toxoplasma is responsible for bipolar disorder, suicide risk, or related to it, schizophrenia, a variety of cancers, Alzheimer's, Parkinson's. It's been linked to a variety of illnesses. This is just one study that I'm going to talk about that looked at Toxoplasma gondii infection and self-directed violence or suicide risk in mothers. This was done in Denmark. They looked at about 45,000 Danish women. Then they measured their Toxoplasma antibodies and looked at, these women were looked at if they gave birth to a child between 1992 and 1995. And what they found was that women with toxo infections that were positive or toxo were 2 times more likely to commit suicide because of this depression issue. There are lots and lots of studies that look at toxo infection and a variety of things like schizophrenia, like suicide risk, like bipolar disorder. The evidence is really clear. And if you don't believe the book, what I write in the book, just Google it. There's a variety of studies, a variety of summary papers. There's one in the Atlantic that did a really good job of summarizing this called Your Cat is Making You Crazy. It's a really good article. I wish I could say it stopped there. But toxo infection in the wild is these oocysts that persist have all kinds of impacts on a whole suite of wildlife. There are people that have spent their entire careers studying the impacts of toxo on wildlife. This is a Hawaiian monk seal. There are less than 1,000 left in the world. It's an endangered species. Just when the book came out, there were 2 more Hawaiian monk seals that died. Hawaii is covered in cats. Remember what I said about these oocysts persisting in marine environments? Well, when these cats defecate in Hawaii, just like plastics run off when you've got water and rain, oocysts run off into the marine environment. And they get picked up by things like Hawaiian monk seals or endangered or threatened sea otters in California. Toxoplasmosis is the primary killer for endangered sea otters in California. There's spinner dolphins, a variety of whales, a whole suite of marine organisms that have died. For those of you in the zoo world or have an interest in zoos, toxo is horrible in zoos, especially for things like kangaroos. That's why we keep out cats, keep out dogs in zoos. You can't bring any domesticated animals because of the things they carry. Cats are particularly bad because of that toxo exposure. You don't want to bring in cats into a zoo ever. All right, so the evidence is clear. And again, I didn't talk about all the diseases. What are some of the solutions? If we've got this big cat problem, which we do, and again, it's global, what can we do about this issue? Well, I kind of think about this in a variety of ways. I like to think about it first for the own cats. I don't think we should be wasting any time on the own cat issue. And so for me, when I was growing up in the 60s and 70s, dogs used to roam free. There used to be packs of dogs in my neighborhood. But because of rabies, because of dogs at the time were the #1 transmitter of rabies to humans from a domesticated animal perspective. Dogs used to bite people. Dogs used to get hit by cars. And then we started to require licensing. We required leash law. And leash law started to be enforced. So why are we not doing this for domesticated cats? It doesn't make sense. We should have the same sort of rules for cats that we once did for dogs. So when are we going to start treating cats like dogs? This was an op-ed that Chris and I wrote for the Los Angeles Times right when the book came out. That day, my wife and I were at a local bar celebrating a wedding anniversary, and our waitress comes up to us and says, the very day the op-ed came out, and she said, I'm a crazy cat lady. For some reason, I get that a lot. I'm not sure why I do. She didn't know me. I didn't know her. She just kind of offered that, and I said, that's great. I really have nothing against cat people at all. And I just said, well, I hope you keep your cat inside. And she said, now I do. She said, my first cat was killed by a coyote. My second cat was killed by a car, which is the primary way many cats are killed. She said, I'm never letting my cat outside again because I've seen through these horrible experiences how my pet that I love just died in these really inhumane ways. So now I have Moose. This is Mustachio. She gave me a picture. You can see it's got a little bit of a mustache. I have him on a leash. And I actually have trained him to stop at the corner. He knows when I want him to walk. And I've trained Mustachio or Moose to kind of go outside. And I walk him twice a day, just like I walk my dog, Boudreaux. I walk my dog twice a day. Chases a ball. It's like this is how we have to deal with our animals, right? If you have an animal, your animal needs enrichment. I work at a zoo. I work at the National Zoo. We have to enrich the animals' lives that are in these enclosures by doing all sorts of things, whether it's stuffing a hot dog inside of a toilet paper roll or whatever it happens to be, putting in toys for them to play with. With cats, it means that it might be a laser pointer inside, a feather toy, or you might have to bring it outside and put it on a leash so you can control it. But where that cat's life is being enriched, it's not just bored, right? Another thing you can do is build something called a catio. which is actually, it's starting to spread. This is a catio from Portland, Oregon. They have catio and wine tours in Portland. This is really growing in a lot of cities. But this is a way that you can put your cat outside. The cat can be stimulated. It can be living an enriched behavioral life. And it's safe, and the animals outside are safe, right? So it's a way of having an animal, a cat, in a responsible way. But this idea that you can just have a cat and you're expected just to leave it inside and that's done, you're done, those days have to change. When you have an animal, for those future vets out there or zoo folks, you have an animal, that's a responsibility, just like a child. You have a responsibility to take care of that animal. It's really important. So that's for the own cats. There's really no excuse for own cats, and most of the groups agree. Not all the cat advocates agree with this. Some cat advocates truly believe that cats should be outside, and they have a right to be outside. I don't agree with that at all. But most, like HSUS and other responsible groups, do believe and do advocate for cats to be maintained indoors. They're owned. Where we get into a lot of the controversy is these unowned cats, somewhere between 30 and 80 million unowned cats. And there are still a couple things we agree on. One of those is that we have to stop pet abandonment. You might think, really, pet abandonment? Yeah, pet abandonment is a huge issue throughout the world, especially in the United States. And you know where it's really big? University campuses, military bases. This is where people take a cat, get a cat, they have a kitten, they love the idea of having a cat or a dog, and then they realize, well, I can't keep that anymore. I'm going away for the summer. There's somebody feeding cats over here. I'll just let it out there and leave it out there. I don't know if there's a cat problem on this campus or not, but I've seen cat problems on lots and lots of campuses. But there are people that abandon pets, whether it's on a campus or elsewhere. They think they see a feeding colony there, they can abandon the pet there, they may not be able to afford it, or that local shelter where they normally could have left the cat is already filled up, and it's a no-kill shelter. And so if it's a no-kill shelter, they will not take any more animals, and those people see a feeding station, they'll put the cat there instead. The second thing that we all agree on, or most of us agree on, is that we have to spay and neuter as many cats as possible. We have to stop cat reproduction, period. Stop it. There cannot be any more reproduction of cats. We have to do whatever we can to stop reproduction because there are way too many cats being produced in the world, certainly in the United States. The third thing that we definitely do not agree on is an approach that many cat advocates have been pushing called trap, neuter, return. The idea here is if you've got an outdoor cat colony, you can trap them, you can sterilize them and neuter them, and you put them back out in the wild if you can't adopt them. And the idea is that over time, if you neuter them, you stop reproduction, that population will go extinct through natural mortality. That's the idea. This is what they promote. It's what a lot of these groups promote. The colony will go extinct. Well, I'm going to go through one example, but I'm going to tell you that all the examples that I've looked at, almost all, have weak empirical support. There's really not strong support for this working from a variety of perspectives. The example I'm going to go through, you'll see the cat colony does decline over time, but that is not sufficient. The devil's in the details in how it declines and over what time frame. So this is a study done by Julie Levy, and this is the study that's really held up as one of the prime examples of how this is a success. She started off with 155 cats, and she studied them over about 11 years, from 91 to 2002. She immediately adopted out 73 of these cats. That is fantastic. I'm totally behind that. Trapping those cats, adopting them out to people who sign a contract that say, I will keep this cat indoors, is fantastic. And they can really, truly care for that cat in a way that's humane. That's wonderful. But that is trap, neuter, adopt. That is not trap, neuter, return. So that should not have been included in her study, but she didn't get it because she's really not a scientist. So I'm reducing her study to a starting point of 82 cats over 11 years. Immediately, 17 of those outdoor cats were euthanized. You know what that tells you? That those cats are not healthy, that there's a disease in these cats, that there's something wrong with, if you're a cat and you're outdoors, you're not going to be in good condition. So a responsible vet saw that some of them had feline leukemia, some of them had feline AIDS, some of them had horrible infections from parasites, and they were euthanized immediately. So 17 were euthanized immediately. 10 were found dead. 6 were killed by cars. 4, they couldn't even assign death. 32 were lost. Where the heck they go? 32 cats. Non-native invasive predators on the landscape, and 32 just disappeared. Well, I can tell you where a bunch of them went. So if you're an animal and you get hit by a car, chances are you're not going to end up on the road. That's only the ones that are really flattened quickly. If you're hit by a car, and I've seen it many, many times, you're probably running as far as you can, as fast as you can, and you bleed out over an hour, over a day, or you've broken a leg and then it takes a couple days before you die. That is a miserable way. That is inhumane. That is an inhumane way for an animal to die if that's what happened to them. And I guarantee that's probably what happened to a lot of them. But in this study, in this so-called scientific study, 32 were lost. 23 remaining cats after 11 years. So yes, the population did decline, but look at how they declined. And furthermore, I gave this talk online on a webinar to this World Veterinary Clinic. And Julie Levy happened to be on the call, on the webinar when I gave this talk. And she said to me, well, how is this not a success? Even today, after 27 years, we're down to 10 cats. So 10 cats after 27 years. You've got non-native invasive predators on the landscape, 27 years, still spreading disease, still having an impact on wildlife, and not to mention what's going on with them. Furthermore, in order for that population to actually be reducing, you've got to neuter a minimum of 75%, but more like 90% of the cats in that colony for you to see ultimately to see a decline. Rarely do they see that sort of neutering rate. You're getting volunteers that are trying to capture these invasive predators that are very, very sneaky to get them neutered. That's a very hard thing to do. Furthermore, it's inhumane to leave cats outside for all the reasons I've just described. Anything can happen to them. They'll get hit by cars, taken away from predators, a variety of diseases that impact these cats. It's purely inhumane. In fact, one group that I never thought I would align myself with, PETA, People for the Ethical Treatment of Animals, is totally opposed to TNR. They are totally opposed to this because of these reasons. They advocate for euthanasia over TNR because it's just purely inhumane and the evidence is overwhelming to leave cats outside. Furthermore, immigration continues into the colony. You can't stop it. It just continues into the colony. People see these cats being fed. It encourages cat dumping. And as I said, cats continue to kill. Furthermore, it's not even scratching the surface. The cat advocates in the United States had a goal of 1 million cats over 5 years. That's 200,000 cats that they want to neuter in a year in the United States. All right, so let's do the math. Let's say they hit 1 million cats, right? Let's say there's 30 million cats. Say 2 million of those are already neutered, leaving 28 million cats. That's a lot of cats. Say half of those are female, 14 million cats. 1 million of those, they neuter them, sterilize them, neuter them. That leaves 13 million cats, females, that are breeding. They have 1 litter, 2 litters a year, 4 or 5 kittens per. You can do the math. Exponential growth is going to happen with these cats. They're not scratching the surface. Finally, how are we evaluating the success of TNR? Would you guys refer to this or think of this as a One Health approach? Of course not. Not even close to a One Health approach. It is blinders on just looking at cats, forgetting about the entire environment, forgetting about the native species these cats are impacting. One Health is an ecosystem approach that thinks about not just the wildlife and the environment, thinks about the people. And these cats, this is just about this one very small fringe group of people who support cats. It is anything but a One Health approach to how we manage our environment. All that being said, folks, this is a bigger problem than most people think. That's why I wrote the book, because it is it's one of the classic, largest ecological dilemmas out there. It's a huge issue, but we're not going to get rid of it overnight. So I don't think we can end TNR immediately. I don't think we can do it. So I'm trying to compromise in many ways with groups to try to figure out a way forward. And so I'm saying that, okay, if we're going to leave TNR out there, if this is going to be a solution, then let's make sure it happens in places where we can confirm low impact on biodiversity and on humans, right? So if we're going to leave a cat colony out there, make sure there's no animals that will be harmed and there's no disease exposure. That means you can't put a cat colony on an elementary school property. Yeah, they occur. Cat colonies on elementary school properties. You need to ensure maximum sterilization and vaccination. That means you need to give these cats boosters. In most cases, most of these colonies, these cats never get booster shots. And most vets say you need to have booster shots for most of your vaccinations. And you need to do regular and proper census methodology. It is not easy to count cats. So if we're going to leave colonies, then we need to manage them in a professional management way. Right now, I can't point to any cat colonies that are being managed in a wildlife way, in the way we think of management. It's not being done. But at the same time, in high priority conservation areas, or areas where there's disease risk, we have to have zero tolerance for cats. That means the entire state of Hawaii, there should be no cats. That means in every city, every town, every state, every county has areas like this where there can be no cats. And this has to be a zero tolerance policy. So I'm willing to give a little bit, but then we need to make sure that in these areas where there's going to be some sort of vulnerability, whether it's to humans or wildlife, has to be zero tolerance. What are we going to do with those cats in those areas? Well, as Julie Levy did, we can adopt out some of them, probably the young ones. The adults probably cannot be adopted out. They're pretty much not adoptable. What do we do with those? Well, some people believe that they go into cat sanctuaries, places like this. We'll have hundreds and hundreds of cats within enclosures. And hopefully they're somehow maintaining the health of these animals and they're minimizing the impact that they're going to have on wildlife. I'm guessing that's not true. But this is not going to be a solution for the 30 to 80 million cats out there. We'd have to fence in the entire state of Pennsylvania and have it all cats. And I don't think you folks in Pennsylvania would like to have a state full of cats. So that leaves us with really one alternative. It's not hard to figure out. We're going to have to come to grips with this idea of euthanasia. We have to. Australia is facing this now. Last year they decided they came up with something called the 2 million cat call because they've seen multiple species go extinct, native species go extinct, and they're looking down the pipe at multiple other species that are going to go extinct within 5 years because of cats. So they have to make a choice. Are we going to leave cats out there and watch these native species disappear from the face of the earth forever? Or are we going to get rid of these cats? It's a pretty straightforward answer when you look at it like that. We're facing the same situation. So euthanasia is something that we're not even comfortable with ourselves. But we've got to come to grips with this if we want to protect our environment and protect the species that depend on our environment. Yes, humans are the ultimate problem, but humans have to be the ultimate solution as well. So these are the cat wars, and they've put us into a huge dilemma. We've known about this dilemma for over 100 years. I'd say 125 years. This has been a problem that we've ignored and we haven't solved. All that being said, I can't help but being hopeful. I am hopeful that we are actually going to see an end to this problem soon. In just the last 10 years, I've seen more people walking their cats on leashes. I'd like to think more people are treating their own cats responsibly, not letting them outside. And I'm hopeful that eventually government bodies, whether it's state, federal, city, will start taking this seriously. We've seen some pretty amazing things change over the last 15, 20, 50 years. Things like DDT. We changed the DDT situation. We changed lead. We've recognized that climate change is an issue. Yes, we're sliding back a little bit, but hopefully we'll regain that. I mean, the rest of the world recognizes that climate change is an issue and is trying to make amends on that issue. I don't know about you, but when I grew up, smoking was common in bars. You can't find a bar where people smoke in it anymore. We're accepting same-sex marriage. We're open to many things that we never were going to be open to before. So even though this is this horrible ecological dilemma, we've faced these dilemmas before, and we cannot back down because it looks too difficult to solve. All these things look too difficult to solve. It's critical we stand up. It's critical we are vocal. The evidence is really clear. The science is really clear. We can't deny that because we just love cats, which I do too. Thanks very much. I'd love to take some questions.
So we're going to allow for some questions now. So one question per person, and then there's going to be opportunities afterwards. Before we break up after the question and answer, we'll have a lottery for the or the raffle for the tickets. or for the tickets. For the books, we have a couple of Cat War books here for you. And then also out front, there are books on sale. So like Peter said, it'd be great if you don't buy it for yourself, buy it for a friend, buy it for a neighbor, buy it for somebody who maybe needs to know about this. So questions?
Hi, thanks for coming.
Yeah.
I had a question about the toxo. You said like 15 to 20% of us might actually have it. What do you think about that? Like, do people get tested? Like, is there anything we can do about that? Like, if we're infected with it?
So there's nothing you can do about it. Some people get tested because they just want to know, but there's really nothing you can do to clear it out of your system. Basically, there are cysts somewhere in your body. Occasionally, they'll drop down into your eyes, and that's when they'll burst. They get this ocular toxoplasma. That can sometimes heal, and sometimes it doesn't. Sometimes it causes blindness in a single eye. I've had people come up to me after these talks that had all kinds of horror stories of where people tell me their story of toxoplasma infection. And the problem is, for the longest time, they've always said that it's sort of inert. It doesn't change. And then people have started to study this in the last 20 years, and there's all these behavioral things, subtle behavioral changes that I could go into, but I want you to read the book, so you'll read all about it. Yeah, sure. Ask me anything, really. You guys can ask me. You're an animal. There's one back there. Don't be shy.
Thanks, Mom. Hi.
Hi.
Wow. Thank you for coming. I actually have a question of, so I'm part of Regis Wildlife Conservation class. We had to read the book. It was a good book. It was an awesome book. But one thing that I've always found pressing, and it's because I'm a little impartial, is how you think predator populations are really affecting the idea of cats almost becoming overrun. I mean, in these isolated communities, you don't really have a lot of apex predators or things that could possibly be regulating them. So,
Are you asking how, like, natural apex predators?
Yeah.
Might be? Yeah. So we're seeing an increase in coyote populations. If I think this is your question, we're seeing an increase in coyote populations in a lot of areas, and so we're seeing a reduction in some of these more rural areas because of coyotes. In places like Seattle, suburbs in some Seattle areas, there are not many cats at all because coyotes are taking them all out. There was a camera trap study done up and down the East Coast in a variety of parks, and where they found coyotes, they didn't have cats. When they picked up cats on the camera traps, they didn't have coyotes. And so it does seem clear that this increase in coyote populations is solving the problem in some places. There are some cat people that want the coyotes killed because they're killing the cats. That's what you'll hear in the cat communities. Did you have a question? Oh, okay, yeah. Okay.
Okay, you said coyotes were, like, I guess, natural predators of cats. So why don't they get, like, a pack of coyotes, sterilize them, and then just, like, release them? Well, we'll keep track of them, obviously, but, like, release them onto, like, cat-infested communities and see how well that does?
Nobody will. I mean, so coyotes are growing rapidly on their own, naturally. And so I think they'll continue, as long as we tolerate coyotes in some places, they will continue to sort of impact the cat populations. And people will see, I can't leave my cat outside on its own, or I can't leave my dog out on its own, otherwise they'll get killed by a coyote. There's lots of communities that will kill coyotes year-round because they see coyotes as pests, as well as a lot of other native species. I don't agree with that. I think coyotes are native species and should be allowed to persist wherever they are. But I think that problem will be dealt with naturally. Yeah.
To kind of rebound off of the second to last question, have you ever been called in to, in support of not removing cats from an area where native predators have harmed a wild cat? I remember hearing about a controversy a little while back where a birder shot a cat that was eating piping plovers, I think in Texas. Have you ever been called in for situations like that? to
So yeah, so that was Jim
expert?
Stevenson, and that was a cat colony that was right near piping plovers, and he shot it and was brought into court and tried, but got off free. Have I gone into court to testify in those issues? Is that what your question is? So I was asked to, but because I'm actually a federal employee, and I represent the federal government, I'm not allowed to testify in court, but I've been asked to do that several times. Just last week, 3 months, I'm asked all the time, actually, to testify in a lot of these court cases, but unfortunately, I can't do it. I don't want to lose my job. Here's a question up front. You guys were so antsy and excited before. I thought you were going to have lots of controversial questions.
Hi.
Hi.
So as someone who has worked both in a vet office and at a zoo, and as someone who lives in an area with these problems,
Yeah.
if I have someone ask me at work, or especially my mom, like, because my mom asks, what do I do? What do you recommend that we tell people who ask us that question, what can we do with feral cats?
Well, first of all, I'm hoping that anyone who ends up in a vet clinic will always talk about keeping cats indoors. There's no arguing that point. If you're a responsible veterinarian, you will say that cats should not be outdoors under any circumstances whatsoever. With regard to the outdoor cats, I think the solution is to try to, like as I said, try to adopt out as many as you possibly can. And if you can't adopt them out, they're better off euthanized. And and I think we have to prioritize, because in some communities, like in Baltimore and DC, we're talking about hundreds and hundreds of colonies of cats that are out there and even in urban areas, those are wildlife-sensitive areas. And so we have to remove those cats in most of those cases. There are now, a lot of these groups are not selling this as TNR, they're selling it as blue-collar cats or working cats, where they're actually taking colonies where they are so-called rat problems, and they're putting these cats out to solve so-called rat problems. We know that cats will only take the small rats. They don't regulate Norway rat populations. But these cat advocates will do whatever they can to argue for the persistence of cats on the landscape. It's the craziest thing. No exterminator would ever recommend putting cats out, a non-native species, invasive species, to solve another non-native invasive species problem. Yeah.
So you had said, like, there used to be like the dog problem, and now there's more regulations. Do you see an improvement with cat regulations, or do you think with municipalities and that sort of thing? Like, what sort of improvement do you see?
So I think your question is, am I seeing an increase in the number of municipalities or cities that are requiring licenses for cats, that sort of thing? No, I am not. I am seeing a few. There are a few, like Ottawa in Canada, there's Aurora, Colorado. There are a few that require it, and there are probably many more that require it, but they don't enforce it at all. Because a lot of cities have gotten rid of their animal control facilities because they've been told by nonprofits, so there's a dog right here. Hey, sweetie. I would have been talking to him the whole time, or her the whole time. That they can get rid of this animal control facility and save money, and these nonprofits will take care of the problems for them. The reality of it is they don't, and they are unregulated, and it's a real problem. Yeah.
Thank you for coming.
Yeah.
It was a very interesting talk you had. Aside from coyotes, has been there any other studies from other predators on cat populations?
Not that I'm aware of. I get this question a lot about what the impact of foxes are on coyotes. Cougars will take coyotes if they're or take cats if they're in the area, but it's I have not seen a lot of other studies, like fecal studies or anything like that, where they've tried to see what else is eating cats. One of the things that's turned out to be interesting with all these eagle cams that are showing up, as eagle populations take off, people are putting a lot of eagle cams up so you can watch eagles nesting. And so a lot of these eagles and other raptor cams will bring in cats to feed their young. And we don't know if those are cats that are actually were killed live or they're dead on the road, and because eagles are actually, they'll scavenge. So we don't know where they're getting them from, but eagles are feeding cats to their young. And there are videos online where you have a hawk going through a park or something, and it'll take a cat. Just last night, someone sent me, you can imagine I get this all the time, a pike, a fish. They're voracious predators. Did you see this video?
No, but I've seen.
Well, a pike came out and grabbed a cat on shore and pulled it into the water. So, you know, just like cats, it's an incredible video. Just like cats will eat anything, you know, a lot of other predators. If cats are available, they will be eaten. But the problem is that just there are so many cats out there that we can't expect that their numbers are going to be regulated by native predators. Yeah.
What is the best advice you can give, like, to clients to keep their cats indoors, even though they would like argue, it's like, oh, it's an inside-out or outdoor cat?
Yeah.
What's
The best advice is if you love your animal, which I hope they do, there's just no way, if you open your door and you let your cat outside out of your control, that cat doesn't know what a car is. That cat doesn't know what a coyote is. So your cat the chances of it dying are much higher. Cats that live outdoors live half the lifespan of cats indoors. That's a fact. That's known. Clients that do that just need to understand that. And that, you know, they need to understand that it could get diseases, a variety of things, a variety of worms. I mean, it's just, you need to sort of give them the evidence that you should not let your cat outside or walk it on a leash or put it in a catio. Vet clinics need to have the materials, they really need to kind of preach that gospel, in my opinion, as much as possible. And I still hear of vet clinics that don't. Any other questions? Yeah.
Okay. Sure. Is it on? Oh, okay, cool. Okay, sorry. I'm asking another question. This has been a very controversial topic amongst my friend group. So, barn cats.
Barn cats, yeah.
Barn cats.
Yep.
So, I know a lot of people here probably aren't equine department, or maybe some of you all do work in barns, but
sure.
The whole idea is that they're so beneficial to the barn life.
Not true.
Ooh.
Barns are the worst place to have cats. Farms are the worst place to have cats for the reasons I've just described with toxoplasmosis. If you're producing meat or food that's for human consumption, that is the last place you want to have any kind of cat because of toxo. People can shake it, but it's the truth. This is the primary way. As I mentioned, toxo is the #1 foodborne illness in the world, and it comes primarily from eating undercooked meat or eating unwashed vegetables. And it's because of that exposure around farms.
So what do you suggest as an alternative method?
You need to use traps. There's lots of other ways of using integrated pest management to control rodents. And that is what most exterminators would advise. You need to control the grains, you need to control the hay, you need to keep a clean barn, you need to store water, all those things to control or trap. I mean, I have rats in my yard. I don't have a cat. I kill them with traps. And I can set them up in certain ways so it's not killing birds. So you can really limit it to, keeping cats in barns is just a culture. But it doesn't mean it's defensible, frankly. And so it's a big mistake to have cats in barns. It's just not. Outdoor cats anywhere are not defensible. Yeah.
If the solution is euthanasia, how do you expect to pay for it?
Well, we pay for things, in a lot of different ways. At this point, governments probably have to take responsibility for euthanizing animals, if that's what we have to do. And it's not going to happen. Again, this is not a problem that's going to be solved overnight. It's just not. We have to prioritize where we go and where cats are removed. And euthanasia isn't hopefully going to be the first alternative. Hopefully many of those cats will be adopted out or whatever it happens to be. But just like with the licensing, people that let their cats outside should be fined, frankly. If they don't have a cat on a leash, they should be fined. When you start enforcing that, it's amazing how much money you can actually generate, which is ultimately to protect animals. That's what this does. And so the euthanasia is just going to have to be something that we pay for. Because if we allow animals to continue to be impacted, we're going to pay through it in other ways, like the Endangered Species Act, which costs hundreds of millions of dollars. Once a species starts to become threatened or endangered, then it really costs a lot of money. And that's what we've seen over and over again.
So you mentioned earlier there were 63 species that have gone extinct. Over what timeline has that been? And are there any species in particular that spring to mind that are having population declines right now?
Yeah, so that's over about 500 years that he looked at. And he estimated that there are a minimum of 400 other species that are impacted by cats. And there's several different species, like the Hawaiian crow is one that's actually extinct in the wild, which is being bred in captivity. They did a release, and about half of those animals died because of Toxoplasma poisoning in Hawaii. They're going to try to do another release soon. Socorro dove is another one that's extinct in the wild, whose extinction was driven at first by sheep grazing, but then later by cats. There was Socorro mockingbird was also almost driven to extinction there, but it's continuing to persist. They've removed all the cats off of Socorro Island, and now they're going to do another release. Piping plovers are another example. They're all over the place. Several species in Australia where it's a problem, and it's not just birds. Mammals are being impacted all over the place. Florida Keys rabbit is another one that cats are posing a direct threat to as well. They're all over the place.
So back to your euthanasia, say there is a portion that we do have to euthanize that's very large. How would you get rid of all of the bodies? Because there's no way you could cremate all of that without hurting the environment in a certain way.
One more time.
So how would you dispose of the bodies of the euthanized
Just like
animals?
they would be, just like we have to get rid of human bodies, they have to be incinerated. That's what you do. I mean, when a dog has to be put to sleep or an animal has to be put to sleep in a vet clinic, those animals are typically incinerated or cremated. Or when a human dies, they're typically cremated, and those ashes are disposed of in a variety of ways. It's not a good, fun thing to think about. I don't have any options other than cremation. I'm actually not. What are some of the examples of what the cremation? I mean, what are some of the examples of what are the impacts of the air pollution? What specifically? I think it's minimal compared to what we're doing with cars and a variety of other habitat loss. And I've never seen that in any of the models that I've seen as a real contributor. Cows, for example, are a much bigger contributor to greenhouse gases. Any other questions? Yeah.
You said that you put out traps to kill cats yourself. How do you know that those are feral cats versus like someone's cat that got loose? Shouldn't there be like people who are like in control of that, not just random people putting out traps?
I couldn't hear the whole question. I'm sorry.
You said earlier that you were putting out traps to kill cats yourself.
No. To kill rats.
Oh.
Yeah. No, I've never killed a cat. No, I definitely did not do that. There are people that do that, and that is a bit of an issue sometimes when people can't differentiate between an owned cat and an unowned cat. But that's all the reason why people should be, if people are going to persist. So this is what some people tell me that, and I have TNR people that come to my talks all the time. If you're a TNR person, you want to talk, that's totally fine. I get it. If you have cats that go outside, I get it. It's okay. What I tell people is, because it's hard. Once you have an outdoor cat and it's an owned cat, it's hard to bring that cat inside. It really is. That cat does not want to stay inside. But you should put a collar on that cat, and you should put a license on that cat, and you should make sure that cat, if it gets lost, it can be rehomed, but with a license, not just a chip. It needs to have a license on it. Not only that, make that your last outdoor cat. Make a pledge that this is the last outdoor cat I will have. And try to minimize the time it's outside. Just let it outside during the day. Put it in an enclosure. Try to change the cat's behavior and change your behavior if you've got a cat. That's the other thing I would tell people that come into your vet clinic that just say, there's no way I'm going to do this. Then try to compromise with them and say, do it. Don't let them out at night, or don't let them out in early morning or early dusk. When animals are just trying to feed, it's when risk behaviors are low or high. Try to change their behaviors in terms of the number of hours that they let the cat out, and change it each week, a little bit less every week. That's how we have to change these behaviors over time. It's not going to happen overnight. Other question? Yeah.
Yes, given that the disease, the nematode, is spread through the fecal matter, how would we safely dispose of cat domestic cat waste, because if it goes to the dump, it could leak out into the environment.
Yeah, so it's a protozoan parasite. And most people, you're right, I mean, probably aren't disposing of cat feces well. If you have an indoor cat only, the chances of that cat having toxo are much lower. It's not 100%, but the chances of it are actually much lower than if it's an outdoor cat. Dealing with the outdoor cat feces is just a problem. We've got to just stop the outdoor cats. Yeah.
So we are talking about how cats affect wildlife through predation. Is
Yeah.
there any research about how cats affect other predators through competition?
It's a good question. You mean like indirect competition with other mesopredators?
Yeah.
Yeah, I don't know of any study. I'm sure there must be studies out there, but I don't know of any saying that. I'm thinking that there must be some indirect competition studies that have been done. None that come to mind right off the top of my head. But I'm saying that, but I'm thinking there must be something. Yeah, I don't know of any.
Boy, we've had some great questions.
Yep, thanks.
I would like to ask one last question, and then we'll do the drawing. Dr. Mara will be out front to do a book signing, so he'll be at the front desk. It's also a great opportunity for some networking if you want to go by and talk with him, but you must have a book. No, that's all right. They can talk to you anyway. My question is, what do you think is the big difference between Australian society and American society? Australians have a strong value system for their native wildlife, and I would assume that they love cats just as much as Americans. Why do you think it's possible in Australia to come up with, or at least look towards a solution, whereas it is so difficult to even talk about here in the United States?
Australia has a long history of losing animals to extinction. They have, and I don't know the answer for sure, I can only guess, but they've had a long history of invasive mammals being a problem, foxes, rabbits. They have brought in enormous numbers of things that have had lots and lots of damage. So they've seen the cost impacts, they've seen the cost in terms of finances, dollars, as well as the cost in terms of losing species. And now the federal government there in Australia basically said enough is enough. So you can have action both from the bottom up, grassroots organizing, that will change something and put pressure on people. Hopefully we'll see that with gun laws soon. I don't know what we're going to do because it's not happening top down with gun laws. And in Australia, it wasn't grassroots, it was top down. It was the federal government in Australia that said, in the Institute for the Environment Minister that said, enough is enough, we're going to do this. And the cat advocates complained, but they just said, too bad, basically. And I think that's where we're going to get here. If it's not a grassroots organizing sort of a thing, or it's not a big organization that stands up to fight this, that's going to change it.
Thank you very much.